Thank you for being with us on Goliath Radio, where we're proud to be the home of more college and professional sports events that are offered by any other station in the region, and where we offer the most powerful and provocative talk in town. That's all on WELE 1380, Ormond Beach.
Good morning and welcome to AirOccupy. This is the radio show that talks truth to power and will occupy your mind for the next hour. I am Liz and I'm here with Jerry and Shannon.
Yo.
Good morning.
And we're going to be talking about the National Defense Authorization Act this morning. And so if you have a question about that, we've gotten a few by email, by phone actually. And if you have a question, we're going to... please tweet us on @AirOccupy, or you can also get in touch with us on our Facebook page, or you could shoot us an email. I'm checking my email during the show, so my email address is liz@AirOccupy. And we have a few announcements. Shannon?
Yes, actually, today is the seed exchange. It's going on right now at Sunrise Park. That's on Riverside Drive near LPGA, and it's actually Holly Hill, not Daytona Beach. It's a seed swap as part of the Global Alliance for Seed Freedom. Flashback to our previous show on Monsanto, yep. And we're going to have a little healthy guerrilla gardening.
And a flash forward to next week's show about permaculture, right?
Right. Yes, thank you. One of the things that we neglected to mention last week on our show with Sue Wilson was the way we get to get this message out there is through local radio, like big 1380 Goliath Radio. So we want to thank Goliath Radio for hosting such important
and different perspectives that you won't hear in the mainstream media. So, like I said, today we're going to cover the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, and we're beginning a series of shows on how the government is increasing its control over, it's increasing its powers, both the federal and local government, under the moniker of the war on terror. And
since 2001, there's been a series of laws passed by Congress, beginning with the Use of Military Force Act and continuing with the Patriot Acts, the various iterations of the Patriot Acts over the last 10 years. The Espionage Act, the FISA warrantless wiretap situation, and more troublingly, the NSA surveillance program that's being conducted in the country. So the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the subject of today's show, was passed at the turn of the year, and it has to do with people being detained in the U.S. by the military if they were found to be part of or substantially support Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces. And what it provides is that U.S. citizens, including U.S. citizens and people here in the country, can be detained indefinitely by the military without trial, without right to writ of habeas corpus, without charges, indefinitely until so-called hostilities are ended. And so that's what the Act provides. And in spring of this year, a lawsuit was filed in the Southern District of New York on behalf of a number of journalists and social activists, including Daniel Ellsberg, Noam Chomsky, Chris Hedges, Naomi Wolf, Cornel West, Alexa O'Brien, who will be on with us later in the show, and Jennifer Tangerine Brown were included among the plaintiffs. There was also a guy named Kai Wargala and an Icelandic legislature named Bridget John Slaughter.
Yeah, we're in just a second. We're going to be talking to one of the attorneys for this lawsuit, Carl Mayer, and he is in charge of the Mayer Law Group, and it's a small public interest law firm dedicated to restoring civil liberties and ending the tyranny of corporatized state power over American citizens. So we're really looking forward to talking to him about the NDAA and about his lawsuit. And the name of the lawsuit is Hedges v. Obama. So if anybody wants to look it up, you can also go to stopndaa.org for more information while we're talking about this on air.
I'd just like to read a quote from the ACLU regarding the NDAA. They said, "For the first time in American history, we have a law authorizing the worldwide and indefinite military detention of people captured far from any battlefield. The NDAA has no temporal or geographic limitations. It is completely at odds with our values, violates the Constitution, and corrodes our nation's commitment to the rule of law." So that's the ACLU's position on the NDAA.
So as the case proceeded in the spring in the Southern District of New York before Judge Catherine Forrest, she ultimately enjoined the act and found that the language of the act...
Enjoining means that she blocked it, so it wouldn't go into effect, so the U.S. couldn't enforce it. Just
right. And
legalese.
In her opinion, she found that the language of the statute, where it's subjects any person who are substantially supporting or these various groups identified, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and their associated forces, that to determine whether or not you substantially support something is so vague that a reporter or activist could not be sure that they would be covered under the act if they worked with a group deemed to be associated with terrorist groups, or for instance, circulated a message of an associated individual by printing an interview. So journalists and activists brought the lawsuit and challenged the constitutionality of the act, and in fact, the judge found that it was vague and was not constitutional.
Until, and we announced when this decision came down, we were all excited. NDAA, the Section 1021 was actually stopped by the courts, and 2 days later, the Obama administration appealed.
Yeah, typically in this kind of case, you have 60 days to appeal a case, but the Obama administration was very aggressive and immediately filing a motion with the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the court which hears appeals from the Southern District of New York, and sought an immediate stay of the injunction on an emergency basis. And in fact, under an unusual procedure, typically those Circuit Court of Appeals cases are heard by three-judge panel. But one judge in this instance stayed the injunction, and then last week a three-judge panel continued the injunction, or continued the stay of the permanent injunction issued by the district court. And in so doing, the court found that on its face, the statute does not affect the existing rights of U.S. citizens or others arrested in the U.S. And the government, in its motion, stated that based on the stated activities of the plaintiffs, none of them would be in danger whatsoever of ever being captured or detained by the U.S. military. And further found that the district court's injunction went way beyond Section 1021 of the NDAA and limited the government's authority under the Authorization for Use of Military Force Act, which was passed in, I think, 2001 or 2002.
Yeah, it was actually passed September 17th. Actually,
immediately after
9/11, September 18th, 2001. But what I was going to point out was the original injunction against the section of the NDAA applied to all U.S. citizens. But when they stayed it, they said, "Oh, well, the U.S. government isn't going to take action against these specific plaintiffs." So, we're going to talk a little bit about that with the attorney for the plaintiffs in just a second.
We'll be back.
Cost of living keep getting so high, and the youth them are so fat and get like economic pressures of the people them are crying. There's no change inside for you, no right. When the justice, hey, oh, when the justice, hey, yes, hey, boy, listen. No plague, no pest But a false government and all these false leaders, a false deacon and all a false preacher. I woe be unto them that are stray from culture, and I eat up my people flesh like the vulture. Cost of living keep getting so high, and the youth them are suffer and can't get no blind. Economical pressures of the people them are crying. There's no change inside for you, no right. When the justice day, oh when the justice day, yes, oh,
Okay, we're back. This is AirOccupy, and I'm Liz, and I'm here with Jerry and Shannon, and that was Justice by Junior Toots. We have
Carl
Carl Mayer on the phone. If we could pick up with him.
Yes, hi. How are you, Liz?
Hi.
This is Carl Mayer. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on our show. This is wonderful to talk to you about the NDAA.
We really appreciate it. This is great.
Anytime.
Carl, this is Jerry.
In Florida.
We're in Daytona Beach.
Daytona Beach.
Yeah.
I've been there before. Beautiful.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's good.
We were just curious when we were reading the opinions and we saw your name. How'd you get involved in the lawsuit?
Well, good question. I had been following as a civil rights and anti-corporate attorney. I've been following the NDAA. Along with my partner, Bruce Saffron, we had brought the first litigation against Verizon back in 2006 for their warrantless wiretapping that was authorized by the Bush administration and then subsequently extended by the Obama administration. So I've been aware for a long time of the increasing threats to civil liberties in our country. When the NDAA was passed late on the night of January 31st, 2011, I saw it as the number one threat to civil liberties in our country. I had known Chris Hedges from years ago. He actually had been a reporter for the New York Times and had done a profile of me in the New York Times. So I called up Chris and I said, have you been following this? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I think, Chris, there may be some legal recourse here if you're interested. And we discussed the theories. And shortly thereafter, he got back to me and said he would be willing to be a plaintiff. And then we filed the original complaint, Hedges versus Obama, back in January of this year. And then subsequently, we were approached by Tangerine Boland and members of Revolution Truth and Kyle Wargala, Alex O'Brien, and the legendary Daniel Ellsberg, and they joined the litigation in the spring. And then eventually we had a trial on the issue in March of this year. So it was sort of it sort of snowballed after that.
Carl, I think for the American public, a lot of people think, watching legislation like this pass, well, it's not going to affect me. This isn't really going to impact my daily life. I'm not doing anything that's going to get me into trouble. But could you speak to why they really should be concerned?
Well, that's what people always say when they don't want to confront the erosion of civil liberty. And we can see how this erosion could happen to anyone. The warrantless wiretapping program, which went on as long ago as 2006, but probably 2001 and even before, that applies to all Americans. So that lets the government monitor the phone calls and phone records of every American in the country. So to say it couldn't happen to me in the case of warrantless wiretapping isn't the case.
Right.
But with the NDAA, or the so-called Homeland Battlefield Act, the issue there is this is the first time in our country's history that the power to place a person, just to grab them off the street and place them in a military prison, a United States citizen or resident of this country, this is the first time that's ever occurred in this country. Dating back over 200 years, there's always been an absolute fundamental precept, which is that as U.S. citizens or civilians, we're constitutionally entitled to a trial by jury and a civil trial with a lawyer. Under this law, the Homeland Battlefield Act, signed by President Obama, even U.S. citizens and residents can now be placed in a military prison with no lawyer, with no right to trial, except maybe by a military tribunal, and this could end indefinitely, because you can be detained under this law until, quote, the end of hostility. Meaning, I think it means until the end of the war on terrorism, but when will that end?
Right.
There's no, it's open-ended. There's no end. It could be infinity.
What do you say about the part of the act that I think it's Section 1022 that has the applicability to the United States citizens, and it actually reads this: the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to citizens of the United States. How does that portion of the law not apply to Section 1021, the section that you're talking about?
Right. Well, 1022 is a different section. It has to do more with people who are armed combatants that are or members of Al Qaeda, and we don't have clients that are in that category.
Right.
In that case, it makes detention mandatory. Under 1021. Detention is mandatory, but it's permitted. And even President Obama, like he always does, like these politicians always do, they always do the sidestep, the two-step, the shuffle. He said he was going to veto the Section 1021 of the Homeland Battlefield Law. He said he was going to veto it. And he said he was going to veto it because it does allow the military to put our citizens in prison. And he acknowledged that in his signing statement. He said,
right.
In his signing statement, he criticized it. But then he went ahead and signed it. And then he promised that, even though the law allows him to do this, he won't put American citizens in jail. Well, great. In 3 months, we could have President Romney. If you don't think President Romney would put American citizens in jail, think again. He's already said he thinks this is a great law. And the chief Republican sponsor, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, said explicitly, America is a battlefield, and we're not going to give you a lawyer if you're a terrorist. I guess Lindsey Graham gets to decide who's a terrorist or not, or who supports terrorists. And it's just totally out of hand. You put this together with the fact that last year, 2011, there were over 100 requests from various government agencies for drones to fly domestically in the United States. So you have drones flying in the United States. You have the police force in many cities looking like they're in the paramilitary. They're dressed in paramilitary garb.
Yeah, we've talked about that on this show.
Right. But you put it all together. People say to themselves, it can't happen to me. Put it all together. Put the drones, put the warrantless wiretapping, put the Patriot Act, which allows the government to look through your records of what you peruse in a library, and then the summit of all this, the worst violation of civil liberties of all this, is the Homeland Battlefield Act. It's just it's a new departure for Americans, and countries overseas, they see this and they say, well, America used to be known for civil liberties and for constitutional protection, and now what's the difference with other countries overseas where you don't get these protections? So it's very alarming. And you know, your listeners should know this fight isn't over at all. There was a injunction in place from May 16th until September 12th. That was a preliminary injunction issued by Judge Forrest. And for that period of time, all citizens were protected from the law. The law was put on hold, put on ice. There's now, the Obama administration has filed an emergency appeal, and they asked for an emergency stay. They were granted the stay, which is a decision we don't agree with, but the court is hearing the appeal on an expedited basis. So we expect that the appeal will be decided either by the end of December or early January. And so we think, obviously, we'll prevail on appeal. If we don't, we'll take this up to the Supreme Court. If the other side doesn't prevail and we prevail, I think they'll probably take it up to the Supreme Court. That may be where it winds up, but the fight goes on.
I've got a question. During the suit, the Judge Forrest laid out several scenarios trying to get a handle on what exactly would be allowed under this law and what wouldn't. Could you talk about that? Some of these, what ifs that...
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, you should know, you had read earlier from the Second Circuit stay, which was really not an opinion, it was just a brief two-page order.
Right.
In which the Second Circuit had claimed that that our clients or American citizens wouldn't be touched under this law. The important thing to remember is that before Judge Forrest, the government's lawyers were repeatedly asked, can you offer assurances to our plaintiffs, the seven, we call them the Freedom Seven, the seven journalists and activists, that they won't be prosecuted under the Section 1021 of the NDAA. And repeatedly the government lawyers said, no, we can't offer those assurances. We cannot offer those assurances. Now, the government changed their position in their brief on appeal, but that's not evidence. It wasn't a claim in open court. It wasn't a certification.
What kind of evidence? What kind of evidence did the government provide in the hearing that was
Nothing. Zip. Zero. They didn't call one witness. They didn't put into evidence one affidavit, not one certification. They provided no evidence. They just relied on their lawyers' representation, which, again, is not evidence, and that's why we feel we have a very strong record on appeal. But to go back to your question regarding the scenarios that Judge Forrest went through, said, look, there could be situations where, let's say, a journalist like Chris Hedges is covering terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, which he did. In fact, at trial, we elicited testimony from Chris that he has been covering and sometimes embedded with up to 17 different groups that are on the State Department terrorist list.
Yeah.
Does that mean that he's substantially supporting terrorism? Under the law, under the NDAA, the Homeland Battlefield Act, could be. And that was one scenario Judge Forrest said. What about if someone gives to a charity that's loosely affiliated with an Al-Qaeda group? Does that mean substantial support? It could be. That's why the law is so vague and so overbroad. There's no definitional section in the law. I've been practicing law for 25 years. No, I've never seen another law that doesn't have the terms of the law defined.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things I remember reading in a news story was this: your childhood friend comes to you and asks you for $250, and you give it to them, and you don't realize that they're connected with a terrorist group. Is that something? And the answer was, well, yes, conceivably they could be held.
Could be, and the government wouldn't define the terms, and they couldn't. The government attorneys couldn't guarantee that the citizens who are the plaintiffs in this case would not be brought under the ambit of the statute. So it's a very big battle. We're fortunate to have a lot of volunteers from around the country. there's a website, stopndaa.org, or carlmayer.com, where you can go if you want to help or contribute. We're starting to get people who are groups and individuals who are sending in amicus briefs.
When are your briefs due?
What's that?
When are your briefs due?
Our briefs are due December 3rd. So, if people want to help or contribute, we're always on a tight deadline here. We have about 2 months. The government's brief is going to come in on November 3rd. So we're in the middle of the battle right now.
Great.
I have one question that came in from a listener, actually. This is from Gary Davis. And he said the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 9, actually forbids arbitrary detention of citizens, or arbitrary detention as violation of human rights. How do you think international law would play into this, or if it would play into this, if this continues on to the Supreme Court?
Right. Well, your listeners asked a terrific question, and is exactly right. These types of detentions are not permitted under international law, but bizarrely, the government keeps claiming that international law authorizes them to do what they're doing, and it's just not so. They claim that the law of war allows them to detain people who might be working with, quote, associated forces, but there's no definition of associated forces in there. So, the government's going to argue that to the Supreme Court, but I think we have international laws on our side. This type of thing, the law of war, was never meant to encompass terrorists or the war on terrorism. It has to do with wars between nation states.
Right.
So,
the Geneva Conventions apply to wars between states, not to nebulous organizations.
Right, exactly. And it's pretty clear that to the extent there are detentions, those violate international law.
Well, Carl, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about the case and about what's going on. Love to have you back sometime as an update after the briefings, or after the hearings, actually, to find out what's happened and what's going to happen with this law.
Anytime. I'll be delighted to. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, you so much. Well, interesting questions. We also have another email from a viewer who said, asked that we mention PANDA. It's called peopleagainsttheindaa.com. So if you want to check out that website, I think it has some interesting information. And just to go back to Carl's website that he recommended, which was stopndaa.org, and you can get some information about all the plaintiffs on that site. We're going to have a short musical break, and we'll come back with Alexa O'Brien, and we're going to be listening to Radio Dread, Karma Police.
Feel ill, and we have crashed a party.
Hi, this is AirOccupy. We're back on the air. I'm Liz, and I'm here with Jerry and Shannon. And right now we're going to talk with Alexa O'Brien, and she is one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit that we were just talking about with the attorney Carl Mayer. It's Hedges versus Obama, and it has to do with the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, specifically one section of it, Section 1020, which allows unlawful detention of American citizens. Alexa, hi, are you on the air?
Yes, hey, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure.
You're a named plaintiff in this suit, and I noticed that you're a journalist, and in the suit you describe your work as a content strategist. That's what you describe your occupation as. Can you explain that just a little bit?
Well, essentially, a section of my affidavit and also testimony in the case as it relates to the National Defense Authorization Act is that I was in a business meeting. This is one of the elements of my affidavit. I was in a business meeting at my former place of employment, and the director in charge of federal programs, who is a former interrogator, told me that people in the federal government were asking about me by name. And I tried to sort of shoo it off because I was in a business meeting. And I had basically said, oh, I know about the DHS memo because somebody who had identified themselves as a federal agent had warned me about it. That U.S. Day of Rage was, according to the federal government, was considered to be, it's ridiculous, high-level anonymous, like cyber terrorists. So I tried to shoo it off, and he asking about you by name.
Huh.
So that's how that ended up in my testimony and in the affidavit. But there are other private security contractors as well who've tried to tie a group I helped found to Al-Qaeda and to Islamic fundamentalists and jihadists. So it's multiple incidences spread out over time, and when you look at the timeline, it's very creepy, and it also I think is illustrative of. I mean, I was in depositions for 2 days with the government. It's a very nerve-wracking experience.
I'm sure. I can't even imagine how it felt when you found out that the Department of Homeland Security was basically trying to link you to Al-Qaeda.
Well, I mean, the first reaction, of course, is it's so absurd. It's so absurd that, I mean, one sort of laughs at it because it's just absolutely ridiculous. But it settles in that this is serious. I mean, it's certainly, even in doing press for the NDAA, I mean, one of the things that I sort of cringe at is that, in a certain sense, to sort of advocate against this unlawful abomination, Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, I have to essentially talk about multiple private security contractors and the federal government trying to tie me to Al-Qaeda. And, of course, when you talk to normal people about that,
right,
you know, their eyes kind of go, well, sort of cross. I'm grateful to be a part of this suit, but I will tell you that I didn't get onto this suit because I love to be an activist for, you know what I mean? Like, this is like...
Pretty scary.
It's the double-edged
really
sword,
scary.
so to speak.
So could you explain just a little bit what U.S. Day of Rage is, so that our listeners can know that really it's not tied to Al-Qaeda?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It started off as a Twitter profile that got started at 3 a.m., and it sort of blew up. And, we essentially came to the determination that if we fixed electoral politics in the United States, it would solve a host of ills and abuses of a government that preys on the resources and spirits of citizens. And what I mean by that is just crappy legislation like the NDAA. And then we realized that if we kind of got to the root cause of the problem, structural reform in our elections, we would really actually solve a lot of problems for the left and the right in the country. And, America is a very large landmass, and it has a very heterogeneous population. It also has different communities. I mean, people are different in South Carolina than they are in New York. And so if you're looking at a just and stable governance, you have to look at the structure of things. So that's how we sort of focused. And it blew up, and, we organized 6 protests on September 17th, 2011, including doing a massive amount of outreach and organization for Occupy Wall Street in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Austin, Seattle, and there's more, Portland, Oregon. And, certainly we attracted the attention of these private security contractors who, they sell essentially, they make Americans pay 100 times for the insecurity we could have had for free. And, of course, provocateurs and troublemakers, they kind of wanted to throw a bunch of, wrenches into the works. And this is what they did. Tried to tie us to Al-Qaeda.
And when you describe the motivations, it's extremely patriotic, democratic, pretty normal American behavior, just what we would expect in our democratic system.
I think you're saying something important, and I also think if you look at the NDAA case, and you look at the amicus briefs, the NDAA is a structural problem too. And it violates our Constitution, which is the structure and design for government, at least in theory. And if you look at the amicus briefs, they're across the aisle. Gun owners of America hates the NDAA as much as more progressive groups. And I think that, we'll see what happens, because it seems like the Fourth Circuit really, and our war on terror and our bloated and expanding executive, is going to be more difficult to stop, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take serious effort on the part of citizens to stop this kind of one-way track to a hellish tyranny.
Right, because it's not just the NDAA. We spoke about that a little bit at the top of the show, that there are other things that our government is doing to strip back our constitutional and abridge our constitutional rights. Other legislation.
Breakdown.
Yeah.
It's a complete breakdown. Look at the Congress that actually passed this legislation. The Congress has been hell-bent on expanding material support. And now what's happening is that, certainly US Day of Rage is one of the things that I have been involved with. But, I also have worked as a journalist. And prior to this particular episode with the Al-Qaeda, I had been covering the war on terror, specifically interviewing detainees, human rights lawyers, the WikiLeaks release of the Guantanamo files. And the government has already used the AUMF to essentially keep journalists at Guantanamo Bay who were part of Al Jazeera to do intelligence on those media organizations.
Now the AUF, just to back up so that people understand what we're talking about, the AUMF is the authorization for use of military force, and that was what we were talking about, that was passed after September 11th, and it was actually passed September 18th, 2001, and that gave the government authority to go to war against quote-unquote terror. Sorry.
Right.
Interruption.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And essentially what we have is we have an executive now that is not being checked by Congress, because Congress is bought by the same factions that control the executive. And the judicial branch is very weak in this post-9/11, world. I listened to the discussion with Mayer, and I wanted to just stress about the arbitrariness of executive power. I was asked yesterday in an interview, well, what do I think the government's argument is? The government's argument against, our lawsuit changes. It's whatever it can do to get its way. It had asked us as plaintiffs, it sort of scoffed at us and said, well, do you know anybody who's been detained under the NDAA? And I gave them 2 examples of journalists who've been detained, one under the AUMF and the other by President Obama's, prerogative. And at the second hearing, the judge asked the government, are you detaining anyone under the NDAA? And they couldn't answer the question.
It's a secret.
So it's essentially the government does what the government does to prevent its executive power from being taken away from it. And, this culture war that we've been in the last, 40 years is destroying this country.
The implications of the NDAA, what we're talking about right now, to the freedom of the press, and I mean that's just crucial to our country's, our civil rights, our country. The idea that we could put journalists, detain them for doing their job is just incredible.
I think you're absolutely right, and I would even bring it closer to home. It's like sometimes it's hard for people to get their head around this stuff because it's wrapped in sort of the fabric of ideology. Why don't people engage in America in politics? I don't think the answer is just because Americans are lazy and stupid. I don't think that's actually diagnosing the problem. Here, look at my. Here I am.
You're kind of breaking up there, Alexa.
Decided in fellowship that we were going to basically try to do something about it. And here we get labeled as connected to Al-Qaeda. I mean, who can afford that risk? Right. And so it becomes even more molecular. It becomes even closer to home. It's like we can't even authentically relate to our society at large with this kind of legislation. It's completely dangerous and damaging to the fabric of civic society.
Absolutely.
Well, you don't have to conjure too far to see the dangers of this, both at that molecular level and just at the level of people keeping informed. I mean, the situation in Afghanistan now, where I, a journalist, and went off and met with the Taliban, and they gave me their negotiating position. I came back and reported that. Am I subject to the NDAA because I've substantially supported the Taliban? Could it be viewed as some propaganda which would subject me to military arrest and indefinite detention? I mean, that's sort of the issue. Is it's so vague. We're all subject to it. We're all subject to this completely arbitrary exercise of military power in the name of what?
Well, and I'm a citizen. I'm a citizen. I go out on the street and I hold up a sign and I say, I've got grievances with my government, and I object to this treatment. My rights are being violated. Am I subject to the NDAA, depending on which group I'm standing on the corner with?
Or who the government defines as the enemy. I mean, they've now declared Julian Assange and WikiLeaks as enemies of the state. So if I, like the fine tradition of Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, if the New York Times prints things related to WikiLeaks, are they subject to this act? I mean, the broad scope of this thing is really, really troubling at a lot of different levels.
Absolutely.
So you've written a lot about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and the detention of Bradley Manning. I think how many days did I say? It was 961 days today that Bradley Manning's been basically imprisoned without trial.
Yeah, that's right. And while the trial calendar shows a February trial, the likelihood, the government wants to have it in August of 2013.
Oh, I was wrong. It's 991 days as of today. Sorry about that. But yeah.
So they want to delay the trial by another year, is what I read.
And I haven't really covered. I've covered WikiLeaks releases, and I've also covered the U.S. investigation into WikiLeaks and Manning. I've built a massive timeline, looked at all the sort of gears of the bureaucracy spinning towards bringing charges against Assange and throwing the book at Manning. And this week I'll be publishing something that I think will be very helpful for other journalists and also the public to try to start to understand what was happening actually within the military at the time of these alleged unauthorized disclosures.
Where will you be publishing that at?
I'll be publishing that at my website, which is alexaobrien.com. And one of the problems is the trial is being essentially conducted in de facto secrecy. So there's no public access to like the motions or the rulings. And while the public can actually fit in the gallery, ever since I started publishing transcripts that were very detailed, the government decided that journalists were no longer allowed to use computers in the press pool, which really hampers their reporting because it's the largest leak case in U.S. history. I mean, it's massive.
Right.
No, it's absurd.
But I think what's important is that, you know, my whole objective with researching this trial has been to try to get as much information out so that other journalists can then use that in a sort of, if it's certified or verified, cited information, that they can then take it and build off of it. Because, you know, we have to do this together because the mainstream media is completely delinquent in their function. A lot of the mainstream media organizations like Wired Magazine, I would even say, are complicit in the propaganda around this trial.
What would you recommend? What actions should we as citizens take to support your courage and the fight against the NDAA 1021?
Well, I think straight off the bat, I mean, and it's no question. I mean, I clearly support Bradley Manning. I mean, I think you should donate to his defense fund, also to WikiLeaks' defense fund, and to WikiLeaks. You know, the reason why WikiLeaks is really important is it's a disruptive innovator in media. It essentially it creates a lever against the corruption that we see in the mainstream media, and it does it in a way that fits within the current economic landscape of media. And so it's a really effective tool to get information out as costs and budgets decrease for investigative journalism. So that's something that people can do immediately.
Yeah, we talked to Sue Wilson last week about the corporatization and streamlining of news gathering function by the corporate-owned media. So you're right about the new channels of providing information. That's the beauty of WikiLeaks.
I think the other thing, too, is just to try to become informed about the case. I mean, you know, it's going to take a little bit of effort. I mean, we're at a point in history in this nation where I think that we can't expect everything to be turnkey and fed to us. You know, it's really the future of this country, and considering the power the U.S. has, we control the seas, we control space, really the future of the world depends on the virtue of individual people. And that means getting off our butts and doing the work that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Alexa, we're so glad that you had some time to join us today. Wish you luck in your lawsuit and the outcome at the Second Circuit. And maybe we can have you back on in the future when the thing gets resolved.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks for being on.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We're going to play a little music, and we'll be right back. is AirOccupy, and we're back. We have a caller on the line. I think he's local, actually. Glenn, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. And
Great.
I am local.
Oh, great. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to make the comment, first of all, to praise Goliath Radio for being bold enough to put this on the air. And second of all, to lament that there's not enough people listening, not enough people getting this information. And I'm appealing to the creative minds that are listening right now to figure out ways to get this broadcast, because 95, maybe 97% of the people in this whole darn country do not realize about the NDAA. They don't even know it happened.
Right.
They only know what happened with Casey Anthony's family and the trial over there with this shooting in Sanford and things like this. They consider important, or abortion, or these things that are so minuscule compared to what's going on with the NDAA. It's abysmal, and I hope more people get the message.
I totally agree.
Get the message out there.
I agree, Glenn. Thanks for calling in and help us get the message out.
Excellent
You
comment.
can
I will
help.
do that, and I hope others will do it as well. Keep
Thank
up the
you.
good work.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, brother.
Bye.
Yeah, I think it's also important to extend this past NDAA and the FISA Act and the various iterations of the Patriot Act and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in terms of the derogation of our rights. I was reading yesterday that a report has been issued on Homeland Security's linking with local authorities to do the Homeland Security bit. They call them fusion centers. There's supposed to be 82 of them. But the report found out that despite spending all this money and essentially giving local authorities surveillance capacities, that all they get is bad intelligence. And in fact, in the end, they determined that while they thought they were funding 80-some odd fusion centers, that they weren't, in fact. That the people that said they were running fusion centers were taking the money and not doing the work. But that this is at the local level, too.
One of the things that we alluded to but didn't really get into in depth, and I hope we do it at a later date, is the corporate tie to the military and how that's impacting us.
Excellent. Well, we're running out of time, but wanted to let you know next week we will have Jenny Nazak in studio to talk about permaculture, and the way it's very interesting the way she describes it, because she wants to fuse the systems and make them more like nature.
We have a caller.
Hi.
This is my second request. Will Liz please send me the phone number for the woman that was on the list?
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay. That was actually Big John. He's the owner of Goliath, and we figured since he called in on the thing, we should let
That's
him
some
in.
real community radio right here.
Yep.
What's up, boss?
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, please, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. We love all the comments and questions that we get, and we'll be back next week.
Peace.
And time keeps dragging on, but that train keeps rolling on down to San Antone. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play